Hey guys, I wanted to make a quick video and run through again just the steps for for doing the Ajax post of your form, right? So so what I've got right here is just a super basic page, right? Just got an HTML page. This just has the form on it. One thing to point out, if you haven't already, in the basic code that I had included on your in your repository when you first created your repository, up here in the head was the script for the JavaScript file, like this, along those lines. If you haven't already, take this out of your head and put it down at the right before the closing body tag. That's very important. Otherwise, when you submit your form, the event handler that you have in your JavaScript file isn't going to work correctly, because when the JavaScript runs, if it's in your head up at the beginning of your page, the JavaScript's going to run before your page is fully loaded, and it's going to attach that event listener to a non-existent element, to a non-existent form, because it hasn't loaded the full page yet. Anyway, just so you know, for the purpose of this, I'm not going to include external JavaScript. I'm just going to write it in here just to make things easier. So we've got our page here, obviously super simple. Let's grab an API key so that we can post this form. Create an API key, copy this, pull back here, let's do var API key equals, wrap that in quotes. So we need to do, first thing we need to do is attach the event listener. So to do this, we do document get element by ID, and we need to select the form. So we're going to get element by ID and give it the ID of our form. So in the case, my dash form. Now we've selected our form at this point, and we need to add an event handler. So if we pop over to this just to see, it is this add event listener and submit, and then we give it a function name. So add event listener. The event that we are listening for is called submit. That's just built-in JavaScript. There's a list of events that are acceptable there. And then the second parameter is the function that we want to be called when the event is triggered. In this case, we'll use a function called submit form. Okay, now we need to create that submit form function. So function submit form. It's going to be passed an event parameter. This is very important. That's, again, just default. When that add event listener function gets called, it will pass this event function. So we've got that. First thing we need to do is do events.prevent default, like this. So that's going to prevent the default form submission from the HTML. So our method and action, you notice up here, I gave it an empty action and method of post. We could omit these entirely if we wanted to, because again, we're taking over the submission via Ajax. So let's make sure this is working and do console log form submitted. Okay. Let's make sure this works. Again, pull up your JavaScript console here. Submit. We see form submitted. Very good. The next thing we need to do is get the actual values that we need to submit in our post request. And we're getting those from the form. So if you look at the example form, again, all of this you can see if you go to this craighh.com/CSE104/example-form.html and do view source on it. This is what the page looks like. But if you do view source and scroll down to the bottom, you can see all the JavaScript that I wrote. It basically is doing exactly what you need to do. It's going to be a little bit different because there's a little bit more involved here, but it's the pattern that you're going to need to follow. So we can just look at this to grab the stuff. So we'll grab 2 of these. But essentially what you want to do is create a variable. Name is good, so we'll leave it at name. And then you do document.getElementById and get your review form. It's actually different. It's my-form in this instance. And then you call .elements, which is accessing the array of elements, and then call .namedItem and give it the name of the input you want to get. So in this case, it's this input name equals name for the name field. Then .value, and again you're assigning all of this, the output of all of this, to this variable. So next we want to do one for comments. It's my-form elements.namedItem. The name is comments. Okay, so now we should have the 2 values from the form. So now we need to actually create our AJAX request to send those values to the server. So again, we can get this from here as well. But basically you do this. This is also on the csc104.craighh.com page. I'm not going to copy, well, I'll show you where it is on here. On the page where you get your thing, down here at the bottom, it's got the post new recommendations, and here's your JavaScript example. We've already done those first several things, so we just need this. Oops. Okay. Clean it up. Okay, so let me explain what this is doing here. So first, var xHTTP, this one's 2 just because it's the second one on that page. This is the very first step, is to initialize your AJAX request by calling new XML HTTP request and assigning that to a variable. Then on that variable, you assign the onReadyStateChange property to a new function. And within that function, you wait for this.readyState equals 4. Because again, this onReadyStateChange function gets called several times, each with the different ready state. So there's several different ready states, 1 through 4. 1 is like initializing, 2 is like connecting, etc. 4 is finished and received response. So we only want to run our code if ready state is 4. As well as the status equals 200. That just means that it was a success response from the server. Let's get rid of this. I don't know what I just did. Oh. Here we're handling an error. So if this already state is 4, but this dot status is not 200, as in the response has been received, but it's not 200, meaning it's an error. We want to console.log the response text so we can see what the error was. Now let's look at the actual request. So we call xHTTP2.open. We give it the method of post. We give it the URL, which is this https://csc104.craighh.com/recommendations. And its asynchronous is true because we're calling onReadyStateChange. It's an asynchronous request. Do this set request header. This is only necessary for the post version. You're also going to have the same code, this XML HTTP request, for your GET that's going to run when the page loads. But in this case, for the post, you need this content type and application slash form URL encode. This is also all in the lecture slides, so if you want to go back and kind of understand more what's going on, look at the lecture on JavaScript in Ajax. So then we actually send the request. We give an API key, and we pass our API key variable in, and now we just need to change. We've got name equals name. That's correct. So again, on this page here, it tells you your post will need the following parameters: API key, which is your API key, name, which is the name field, and then text is the expected parameter for the text field of your recommendation form. So in this case, comments. So we've named it comments in this thing, and also the variable is named comments, but the expected parameter is text. So this still needs to be text and text equals, but this here I'm going to change to comments because that's the variable name that I created when I did this. So here, let's just do console.log this.response text just to see what the response looks like. Okay, let's see if this works. Refresh. Submit. Good. So form submitted, and then we got a successful response text that looks like some JSON that includes like the user ID from the server, the name, and the text fields that we submitted to it, as well as an ID field. It's very good. So what you need to do now, the next step, our post successfully worked. So now what we need to do, potentially two things. The first thing is we could set the value of those fields. You notice after we click submit, these here don't change at all. We could empty these out. The way that you do that is this very similar to the way that you got the value. So if you just copy this part of this line with your get element by ID and then your elements and then .named item, if you put this in here, and then instead of assigning the result of this to a value, we want to assign the value to a new value. So just do the same .value and then equals and then an empty string like this. And then let's do that for both name and comments. .value equals. So basically you're saying once I've gotten a successful response back from the server, I want to take this element of name and element with name comments, and I want to set the value of those elements to 0 or to an empty string. So it's going to clear out the form. That's step one. It's not necessarily required, but it's really nice to do. It helps kind of make things make a little more sense. Another thing that you could do, let's say that underneath our form we created like a paragraph with an ID of success message, just because we've got autocomplete. For brevity, let's also do style equals display none. Normally we're not going to do style tags like this, but do that within your CSS in real life. But for the sake of example, I'm going to make it easy. Thank you for your comments. Now this should be hidden on our page, correct? Yes, it's hidden. What we can do is also here, after we've cleared out the form, we can do document.get element by ID success message, and then do style dot display equals block. I think that's gonna work. Okay, that worked. I was kind of surprised. I got it right on the first try. So after the form was submitted, it cleared out the form values, and then it changed the style of this paragraph from display none to display block, which makes it appear on the page. So we've got a thank you message. Again, you could style this. You can make it green or something. style it appropriately. This is just an example of what you can do. Now, the next step that we need to do, let's add some comments here just so we remember. So here we are clearing out form fields. And here we are showing success message. The next thing we need to do is to add new comments to page. I recommend that you do this with a function so that you can also call this function from your getAjax when you load all of the reviews. So I think in the example I used a function like render review or render comments. We'll just use that as well. So render review, and we're going to pass it. Actually, we need to do two things. We need to do the JSON parse because you notice that this response text that we got back is JSON. It's not really a JavaScript object yet, but we can very easily convert it to a JavaScript object by saying var review, let's call it new review equals json.parse this.response text. So what this is going to do is create a new variable called new review, and it's going to do json.parse, which is going to take that JSON text and parse it into an actual JavaScript object. Just for fun, let's console log new review so I can show you what that looks like. Comment that out for the time being. Fresh test. Okay, so you notice here, this is the text. This is from the console log this.response text. It's a string is what it is with JSON inside of the string. Here we have an actual JavaScript object that has properties. So it's an object, it's got a property of user's ID, it's got a property of name, which has a value of string text, and has a property of text, which also has a value of a string test. So there you go. So now that that's an actual object, we can do objecty things with it in JavaScript. So, including passing it to another function. So it's called render review, new review. And then we need to create this function. So down here, function render review, review. Again, it doesn't matter what we name this variable in here. It's just what we're going to call the variable that was passed to us. So in this instance, the review object. Okay, so now what we need to do is create new HTML elements with the aspects of our review to write them to the page, right? So if we look at the example form examples, here's my render review function. So I create a new li element. We're going to do this a little more simply than in my example. So var review item equals document.create element li. Let's see here. Let's just do this really simply. So let's do review item dot inner HTML equals, let's say, name plus review dot name. Okay, so now what we've done is we've created a li HTML element, and then we've set the inner HTML of that li to this text, name plus review name. Now we need to add the comment. So let's do the same thing, but let's use plus equals because we already have a string there. So plus equals will add whatever we pass to it to the existing value. So let's do like comma space comments space plus review dot text. because again, looking back at our object, that's the, we've got property name and property text. Okay, so review.text. Now we need to add this li to a ul, right? Because lis have to be inside of uls. So the first thing we need to do is add a ul on our page for these to get added to. So let's add this here, ul, and we need to give it an ID. ID equals all reviews. Something along those lines. And we don't need any actual LIs in it for now because it's just going to be empty. Now, document dot get element by ID, all reviews, and we're going to do append child. Append child, and we're going to pass it the review item li that we created. Okay, so again, we've got this render review function, and this function's job is to take a review object and write it to our HTML. So we're doing that in 4 easy steps. We're creating a new li element. We're setting the HTML of that li element to include the properties that are passed in the object. And then we are adding that li as a child to the all reviews ul that we've already created on our page. Common problem that I saw on Wednesday with a lot of students is if you just kind of copied, my JavaScript from the example, and you didn't, in this append child portion, if you didn't change this ID here, or if you hadn't added that UL to your page, you would get like a, can't call append child method on undefined object, something like that. That's because you either didn't create the URL or you didn't change the ID here in your JavaScript to match the ID of your UL. So, save this, see if this works, test, submit, boom. So our thank you message, and now we've got an li inside of our UL with the name, which is test, and then comments, which is test. I would highly encourage you to do something a little bit fancier than this, right? Like, this is just text, it's not very readable. You could do a table, you could do, a nicer UL with some better labels. You could do 2 ULs, one on the left with names, one on the right with comments, something along those lines. I'm just showing you the bare bones, easiest way to do it. There's one other thing that we need to do that hopefully you haven't been having quite as much trouble with, but we also need to get all of our existing reviews and render those as well, right? So let's go after our first Ajax and let's add this new one. So I just need to update the API key here. Okay, so we're doing the same thing that we did before. We've got, this is outside of that submit form function, by the way. So that's closed right here. So now this is just going to run when the page loads, right? This is just going to run by default, not inside of any function. So we've got XHTTP, XHTTP request, on ready state change. Here, I'll show you what we need to do here in a second. For now, we'll just console log the objects. Let's change this to reviews, just for consistency. I think that's what we would call it here, right? New review. These would be like old reviews. And so this one, instead of being a post, is a get. And because we're not passing the API key as a parameter, like a form URL encoded parameter, we're just passing as a normal URL parameter, which is going to be up here. You can also do it that way if you wanted to, but this way is fine. A little bit cleaner. and then we send it. So what this is going to do is when the page loads, it's going to make this GET request to the recommendations with the API key, and then once it's received the response, it's going to console log reviews, which we're expecting to be an array because there's multiple existing reviews. So let's refresh, take a look at that. So we've got an array with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects. Again, kind of a pro tip in the inspector in the console. If you click on this object over here on the right, it'll show you what the object looks like. So these are the properties that are on the object. Very handy. So now we've got an array. So what do we need to do with arrays? We need to loop through them. And we've got the review objects in that array, which we need to render onto our page. So for loop, or var I equals 0, I less than reviews.length, excuse me, reviews.length, I plus plus, do curly bracket. So this is going to loop through each one, and all we need to do is do render review, reviews, and then I. So again, this reviews is an array, and we call a specific element an array using square brackets, and we want to call the element of the array that we're currently iterating on. So this I is going to run through values 0 through 5, or however long our array is. So this is going to call the render review function, and it's going to pass the object at this position in the array. So that's all you need to do, because we've already written the function to render that review to our page. So all we have to do is call it. That's the benefit of doing it kind of with that pattern. So now when we refresh the page, we've got our test comments right here. They immediately load on the page. If we add a new one, submit, it gets added to the page as well. And then if we refresh, the new one's going to be there. Okay, that's about it. It's really simple. It's a challenge because there's kind of a lot of different pieces that you sort of have to understand to kind of be able to just run and do this from scratch. But all in all, it's pretty simple once you kind of understand the concepts involved. So again, I'll run you down through this real quick. So we've got our form. You just need to know the ID of your form and the name property of your inputs. You can or can't do this success paragraph. It's not required. But you are going to need an empty element on your page. It doesn't have to be a UL. This could just be a div. Like we could change this UL, just div. And then we could, in our render function, change this li to just div. Or we could even do like p. Save that. Refresh. Boom. Now if you inspect this and look at it, we've just got a div that contains all the reviews, and then each review is a paragraph. That also totally works, totally fine. It's up to you how you want to do it. So again, kind of taking it from the top, we've got our form. Then with our scripts, we need to save our API key somewhere where we can use it. So I've saved it in a variable. You need to add an event listener to your form. So you select your form by ID using document.getElementById, and you do .add event listener. You do submit just like this. This is going to be the same for everyone because submit's just a standard JavaScript event when the form is submitted. And then you're going to give it a function name that you've written that you want to be called when the form submits. So then you need to create that function. So just do function submit form. It's going to get past this event object. And all you need to know is that you just have to do this event.preventDefault. And that will keep the default form from submitting. Like if we put in here this action like google.com or something, without this event.preventDefault, the form would submit to google.com. So if we test submit, it's going to even redirect us Yeah, so file can be found at google.com, right? So like that's the default action, is whatever your action is up here. We prevent that default action because we're doing it via Ajax by doing event.prevent default. Now it's going to do what we tell it to in JavaScript rather than just the default, right? You can console log if you want. We need to get our two form field values. So you do get element by ID, elements.named item, give it the name of your field, in this case name. Again, name being this name. And then also do the same for your comments. Then we need to initialize our Ajax requests. So you do that like this. All of this is both on the csc104.com where you have your API key. Also in the lecture slide. You go back and look through the lecture slides. It'll help you figure this out. We do the onReady state change. When ready state is 4, we want to clear out the form fields if you would like. We can show the success message again if you would like. And we need to do json.parse on the response text so that we actually have an object. And then you call your render function on that object. And then this here is just error handling. So if an error is responded by the server. For instance, if we were to not pass one of the parameters, so like if we take out, and text equals comments, so we don't want to send the comments field, we're going to get an error because the server has to get the comments field for it to work. The server is going to return with an error. So again, error, no text field passed. That's why we handle those errors, so that we can see, oh, I forgot to include the text field. And send. So that's for post. For your get, so to get the existing recommendations on your page load, we do something very, very similar. But instead of post, we do get, and then we have the API key in the URL. And then with the response, we have to loop through them because we're getting an array back. So we still have to do json.parse, which parses the JSON string into an array of objects. And then we loop through that array. Again, you can look back at the slides to see how to do a for loop. And we call render review on the iteration of the array that we're currently on. Do it just like this. And then again, to recap, render review accepts a review object. First thing we need to do is create a new element for your review. Doesn't matter what kind of element you create. It can be an li, it can be a div, whatever. We set the inner HTML of our new element and pass it. We've got review.name and review.text to work with. And then we want to append our new element to some existing element. So the only requirement here is you have to have some sort of element in your HTML that you can add these new ones to. And remember, there's going to be multiples added because all of your existing ones are going to be added using this render review function. I think just to show an example, if we look here, we did something even fancier. So we created a div. So with the example form, I created a div for each element of the review. So like the name, the menu selection, etc. The comments each have their own div. So I kind of went a little bit deeper. So I create element div, I set a class attribute, so I did columns, I set the inner HTML of the div, and then I appended the div to my review item, which is an li. Then at the very end, after I've appended multiple divs to my li, I appended my entire li to my ul. Make sense? Okay, that's all you need to do. It seems like a lot, but once you kind of have a handle, it's really just 3 steps. 1, do your event listener for the submit form and a function to do the submit with the Ajax in it. 2, you need to handle your get request that happens when the page loads. And you need to make sure you have a function that can render the review object onto HTML on the page. Okay, have fun.